Over the course of 2022, the underlying economic conditions facing countries in the region have shifted considerably. Higher energy prices, higher food prices, higher inflation, and ongoing supply chain issues stemming from the pandemic are still affecting countries in the region as they are globally. But ultimately, the impact that we're seeing in the region will depend whether countries are oil importers or exporters. But what we saw coming into 2022 was countries continuing to pursue a fiscally conservative path. They were looking to reduce the fiscal deficits that had extended over the last 5 years. The average deficit among Gulf countries extended to about 8% of GDP over the last 5 years. And now looking forward, because of the improvement, say, for certain countries with the higher oil price, the fiscal balance is looking to be closer to a surplus of around 5% for these countries, which does give somewhat more bandwidth. But ultimately, in 2022, it was really a continuation of stability. Countries where we saw growth were perhaps the smaller markets with lower budgets, so Qatar and Kuwait, who are pursuing major modernization drives. We also saw growth in North Africa, countries like Morocco and Egypt also pursuing major recapitalization and modernization programs. And that was balancing the more subdued budgets that we saw in Saudi Arabia, Oman, and to a lesser extent UAE, where spending was really quite stable. Going forward, it will be really interesting to see how countries in the region respond to higher oil prices. But there is that recognition that there is incredible volatility. The higher oil price that we've experienced over 2022 was caused by external factors rather than anything on the supply side, any decisions made. So that volatility isn't something that can really be controlled by these countries. So they're wanting to build in resilience to any short-term shifts in the oil price. That said, with any increase in government revenues, what countries might do is look to increase funding for domestic defence R&D, any defence industrial development that leads towards the ambitions and goals of countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But ultimately, I think countries will be wary of increasing their defence budget by too much over the longer term. The average spend across the region is 5% of GDP on defence, and that is far higher than the global average of 2%. So what you might call the defence burden, the military burden, is already quite high in these countries. So they're probably now moving to see whether this perhaps short-term increase in revenues can be used for anything that was delayed over the last few years. So major procurement programs, capital programs, investment, that kind of thing. So what they will probably want to avoid is anything that causes a long-term increase in the underlying defence budget to increase that proportion of GDP.